I kind of feel like my videos always need a beginning, middle, and an end. And so this is the beginning. This is a spot I landed that I've never landed before. I've actually tried to land it several times and have never been able to get my wheels down and get stopped in the distance that I need to. So I have usually drug it and not felt comfortable enough to actually land it. And today I was able to actually land it for the first time. There's been many times over the years that patience has paid off when I've wanted to land a particular spot. I'll just keep going back to it, not expecting to be able to land it. And one of the days that I go back to it, it's actually in my favor. And I'm able to get in there, land it, clean it up, and make it a new spot. But patience, kind of like in investing, it takes time and patience to actually sometimes make things happen. This line here in this still photo represents the spot I want to land. Years ago, I used to land this spot regularly, but it doesn't take long for Mother Nature to reclaim what is hers. And because I stopped landing it on a regular basis, all of a sudden things got out of control and I couldn't land it anymore. And since I really want to be able to land it, I decided to put the effort into being able to get back in there and enjoy that particular place throughout the year. I'm landing this spot, which I flew downriver and looked at it, and I flew upriver and looked at it. I left that out of the video, so I did my reconnaissance, made sure that I had plenty of room to get stopped and that the poker sticking out there wasn't a wing getter, and came in and landed, and now I'm gonna set up my day. Okay, this is where the adventure begins today. The line on the map depicts about how far it is as the crow flies, which is about 1.3 miles. I'm guessing more like 2 river miles. So the first thing I have to do is sort through all my gear. I used to go in there with my family and camp out, and over the last, 5 or 6 years, I haven't done anything down there, and so now it's all grown over. It's kind of a really neat place, pretty private and remote for what we have here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's my plan. I'm going to try to get a little bit of footage of the alpaca raft and how well it works. I've been using the alpaca pack rafts for probably close to 10 years now. They're a pretty amazing little raft. They weigh, I think, 5 pounds, and then with the paddle another pound, so you're looking at 6 pounds. So for airplane camping, they're ideal. I'm obviously not floating this Colorado River here in them, but they are a very capable little raft. As small and fragile as they look, I've actually never punctured one yet. I own 3 of them myself. I think I paid around $900 a piece for them, and as far as I'm concerned, they're worth every penny. They do have some newer styles now with self-bailing floors, and probably if I was to buy another one, it probably would have a self-bailing floor so that when you go through rapids, you're not constantly emptying them out. But they will float with the raft full of water. My one raft has a spray skirt, and so you can actually keep the water out of the boat if you want to be basically secured into the boat. I would suggest that anybody that runs with a spray skirt be familiar with getting out of the boat when you get flipped upside down, because it can be a rude awakening trying to figure out how to get out of it when you're upside down in it. Don't ask me how I know how hard it is to get out of this thing when you haven't practiced egress from it, because I learned it the hard way going down Big Creek. I almost always take them to Idaho with me. I usually travel to Alaska with them. They're a really handy tool for getting across rivers and streams when the water's high. If you're hunting, you can ferry gear across. There's just so many uses for them, and they weigh next to nothing. Look at the size of that tree. That's old growth there. Monster tree. Two monster trees toppled here. My goal is always to capture the true beauty of the surroundings I'm in. It's pretty hard to do that with just a camera. As most of you know, what you see with your naked eye is pretty much impossible to capture with a camera. Even the best photographers can't seem to really do it. In my opinion, you really need to experience the outdoors yourself. Watching videos is, I guess, a second best, but if you really want to experience what I'm experiencing, you got to get out there and do it. I did edit out most of the slow water, but if you really don't want to watch 6 minutes of me floating the river, you can fast forward through it and get on to the next section. You aren't going to hurt my feelings. I've actually used this little raft to float quite a few rivers now. In Idaho, I've floated Big Creek, the Selway, and I even floated the Middle Fork of the Salmon in April with a dry suit. In Oregon, I've floated the John Day River, the Deschutes River, and the Owyhee. And there's probably a few rivers that I'm not thinking of right now, but it works really, really well. I've done one overnight trip with it. That's a little more challenging carrying gear, but it can be done. Looks like a great fishing hole right here. Good spot. Hit that one on the way back. I used to land a spot right up in there. It's all grown over now, so you can't land it anymore. Actually, a lot of the places that we landed up in here are gone. Taken over by the alders. Those alders grow like weeds. The wind's really come up. I don't know how much fishing I'm going to get to do. I'm fly fishing. Kind of hard to fish when it's blowing 15 or 20. I don't know if you can see these trees and how tall they are. They're pretty spectacular old growth in places in here. The gear that I'm showing off in my videos, I'm not being paid to show it. These are just items that I think are worth a look at if you're an adventurer. We used to land a sandbar right on this corner too. It's all grown over. It's amazing what, I don't know, I guess it's been 15 years will do to a place. It was so much more open 15 years ago. Grr! Woo! That is cold. Need a wetsuit or a dry suit. I don't really like leaving my airplane for long periods of time on places in the lower 48. Alaska, it doesn't bother me to leave the airplane, but here you just, I don't know, you just never know whether someone's gonna do something to your airplane. The spot that I picked kind of sits back in, so you, unless you're fishing the river, you probably wouldn't ever see it. There's no roads down this river, so there's no way for anybody to see it from a road. And nobody's going to come in there and land. So that's not a concern. It's just people on foot that I'm worried about. There's a nice little section of rapids. Picks up pretty good through here. Yeehaw! I think I'm going to get wet. Oh boy, it's going to be cold. Woohoo! Yeah! Woohoo! Woo! There's actually a pretty good waterfall in this river, but I'd never do it in this. Woohoo! Brr! Ah! That is cold. Freaking cold, man. This is great elk country. Lots of elk in this country. Not really looking forward to hiking back because I think I'm gonna have to cross the river back and forth if I want to stay on it. Other than that, then I have to go up that steep stuff along the edges, which can take a long time. Not sure what we got going on here. Can't tell if you can get through or not. Brr. Woohoo! So we're just going to kind of go towards this wall here and then pivot out of it. Kind of an eddy right there. Be a good fishing spot. It's going to be interesting to see if I can even make an airstrip out of what used to be an airstrip here. It's really overgrown. When I flew over it this morning, I was like, I don't know. So this may just be a fun day of paddling and hiking and fishing. A little exploration. Can't beat this though. So we're coming up to the end here. I think this is my stopping point right here at these big rocks on the left. Well, I guess I'll get out and walk from here. Well, I'm going to pull the boat out here, leave it for just a few minutes. I'm going to walk up there and see what it looks like. See if it's worth the effort. Scope it out. I have this handy dandy filtered bottle for filtering your water. My daughter bought it for me for Christmas. I think they're sold on Amazon. I'll find out more information about it. But basically you fill up the cup. So this cup here, you fill that up, and then you put the other orange part inside of it and press down, and you get filtered water. So you get a cup full of filtered water. Pretty handy. So I have my cup of water, and you fill it up to the line, and then you take this piece, kind of, there's a screw on top here, kind of break it loose so that it can let the air out, and then you just push down on it and it filters it. It's actually easier if you just take the cap off, lets the air out. Anyway, cup of water. Right out of a mountain stream. You don't have to worry about getting beaver fever. Ah, that's good. I got my boat stashed off in the brush here, so if the wind came up, it wouldn't grab it and take it downriver. Anyway, I'm gonna walk up into the old camp spot and see how it looks. Okay, so I think we're getting to the section that I used to land. In fact, I think this was the end right here. So yeah, this was my turnaround spot right here. Scotch brim's not a problem. I can chop it down. What I do see as a problem is there's a pretty big washout in it now. This was the runway. Of course, these little pine trees, they grow pretty fast. You know, a pine tree this size right here will be a pine tree that size in 4 or 5 years, and a pine tree that size in another 4 or 5 years. quite a bit of wind today. Wouldn't be landing it. I'm walking into probably a 10-mile-an-hour wind. This didn't used to be a gravel bar down here. This used to be another ledge that kind of dropped off. You couldn't land. You could almost land this. With a little bit of work, this might be actually the more landable spot now. The only thing is the takeoff. You can't take off upriver, it's too tight of a turn. Even flying around this corner feels really tight. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my camera and get out my rangefinder and see how long it is now. Well, I've got a fair amount more work to do with like some hedge clippers, but I'm done with the bigger stuff, clearing it out. It should work for getting me in here to do a little bit better job with the airplane. So I'll just land on this Scotch broom, get out my snippers and snip all this Scotch broom down, and then I'll have a good campsite again that I can come to. It's great fishing right down here. There's a hole down below. I'm gonna go ahead and pack up and start fishing my way back upriver now. It's got a nice little shady camp spot back in here. And once I clear it back out, looks like a bunch of limbs have come down, but once I clear it back out, there's actually enough sites for 3 or 4 tents, and it's a great little place to come and get away typically. Anyway, here's a view from the touchdown spot. It's about 100 yards from here to the end, and it looks like I'll touch down, kind of run right through here, and keep going right through here. And usually I get stopped if all things are good, not too much of a tailwind. I'm usually stopped before I get to this washout, and then I can kind of just hook around the washout. So thinking back, I remember this washout actually being here. So this was my track right here, going right through here, and then right at this last alder, it's 100 yards. So it should work. Just need to do some bushwhacking. But I'm beat. It's like 90 degrees out, I bet. So I got a plan of attack now. I'm heading back to the airplane. It's probably a mile upstream, maybe a little bit more. I'm gonna take the alpaca and fill it with my gear, and then I'm just gonna tie it to my belt and tow it upriver with me as I fish. Then if I need to get across the river, I can just hop it in the alpaca and row across. So I think it's gonna work, but I've never done it this way before. So let's see how it goes. I'll show you my fish along the way if I catch any. Well, I made it back, almost. Airplane's over there in the sunshine. I'm standing here in the shade, kind of cooling off a little bit. Didn't have much luck with my dry fly fishing. This little number, I think it's probably number 22. I think it's a royal wolf, or I call them strawberry shortcakes. Didn't produce much. The other thing that I realized, towing the pack raft really wasn't very efficient, especially going over these gravel bars with this big rock stuff. You had to stay in the water, and it's really hard walking in the water for miles. So I ended up tying my dry bag onto my day pack, and that's how I went. Oh, that was hard work. As I was packing up, getting ready to go, the wind was kind of swirling, changing directions, and so I was trying to decide whether I was going to take off out of this spot downriver or taxi across this little small channel that was left and take off on the gravel bar upriver. Anyway, I had made my decision to take off upriver, and just before I started the airplane, a young lady with 3 young kids comes walking up to me. She didn't even actually say anything about the airplane, which was kind of unusual. She asked me where the bridge was at, and I said, well, it's upriver from here. And she's like, there's no bridge downriver? We're floating downriver to the next bridge. And I'm like, well, you got a long ways to go if you're going to the Lewis River Bridge. And this was like 6 o'clock in the evening. So I asked her where she came from, and she told me. And I said, well, the bridge that you're thinking of is upriver from the confluence, and you need to turn around and start hiking back home the way you came, because if you want to get home before dark, you probably need to get going now. Anyway, she was a little disappointed, but I think I saved her from spending a night out in the woods with her 3 kids. This opening shot is from my 360 GoPro camera. I use the GoPro editing software to edit the views that I wanted to see, and so that's what you get to see here. Me flying into the strip for the first time after I've cleared it. So the beautiful thing about YouTube is if you don't want to watch all my flying downriver from the gravel bar that I turned the camera on at, you can fast forward. I think there's about 4 minutes of travel time from the gravel bar I turned the camera on at to Paradise. So, things that you should know about Paradise. I did not discover Paradise. A friend of mine did. He was kind enough to share it with me. Over the years, I've taken my family, which included my wife and daughter, and camped out there for, I think, 4 or 5 day stretches. I've taken my daughter and her best friend and my wife in there. I've gone in there by myself for fishing day trips. Just like this morning, I always try to stack the odds in my favor and go in early before the winds have picked up. If the winds have picked up, it's not a good place to be. So usually I try to get in before 7 a.m., sometimes even earlier. Other issues are on takeoff early in the morning. The light from the sun blinds you on takeoff, so it can be a little bit scary. If you've never taken off into direct bright sunlight just as the sun's coming up over trees and had that experience where you can't see anything and then you're going into a tight little turny canyon, very scary. One year we were camped out there and having a good time. The visibility was kind of low that morning, and a helicopter comes up the river, low level, spots my airplane, but keeps going, doesn't really even pay much attention to it. A few days later, we had moved our camp to Paradise 2, and my wife and daughter were swimming in the river, and I was fishing upriver from them, and that same helicopter came in. This time he hovers over my airplane for a little bit. I make my way to the airplane and I get on the emergency frequency, try to contact him, make sure he doesn't think there's a problem. And I can't get a hold of him. A few weeks later, I'm in Alaska with a good friend of mine, and I get a letter, certified letter in the mail, my wife telling me that sounds like I'm in trouble. Well, that's a whole story in itself. That helicopter was hovering, taking pictures of my airplane, and those pictures ended up with the National Forest Service. I ended up being a little concerned, but decided to take a proactive approach and call the FAA and find out if I had done anything wrong. Interestingly enough, that initial conversation They told me I had, and I said, so quote me the FAR that says I have. That FAA manager said, well, I'll have to get back to you. In a second phone conversation, he told me, well, as far as he was concerned, or the FAA was concerned, I had not, and that my beef was with the controlling land agency. That's when I started to dig into the National Forest Service and the CFRs that apply to the National Forest Service. Anyway, I didn't allow this National Forest Service manager to bully me and asked him for my ticket and my day in court, which never came. A few of you will probably recognize that short little stretch in that canyon from Big Rocks Long Props Volume 1. It was part of the opening. It is pretty tight. Where it necks down, it probably is 7, 8, 9 feet off each wingtip as I'm flying through there. You'll also notice when I land here, the Scotch broom is around 3 to 4 feet tall, and that initial clump of Scotch broom actually pitches me nose down when I hit it. I was ready for it. I was actually expecting it. And so I knew that when I hit that initial Scotch broom that I was going to want to be back on the stick and maybe even ready with a little bit of power. I didn't end up needing any power. And when I pitched, I basically, got through it, felt what it felt like, and then used my brakes as needed. And that's how it's done, folks. Just landed this spot. I'm going to go out and cut down a bunch of Scotch broom. I don't know if you can see this, but this is my braking. So when I brake, I've got my stick all the way back and I'm using maximum braking effectiveness to get myself stopped as short as I possibly can. So you can see that, I'm skidding over the ground and modulating my brake pressure so that I don't go up on my nose, obviously, but whenever my tire's making contact with the ground, I'm on the brakes. There's very little space back in this little hidey hole, but I decided to taxi my airplane back and just double check that I got enough room here to actually spin my airplane around. Picking up my tail, I can get it up over the Scotch broom and around things, and I end up with maybe less than a half a foot off my right wingtip there. But it's going to work. So I got to kind of hook around this washout. This washout's actually gotten bigger over the years. Well, that was a lot of work, but I finally got my airplane all the way back where I want it. I'm going to do a little hiking around and then get out of here before the wind changes, hopefully. Right now it's blowing upstream about probably 5 to 7 miles an hour, which is good for getting out of here. If it changes where it's blowing downstream, I'll have to wait until evening. So I'm just gonna go do a quick hike, taking my fishing pole just in case I wanna put my line in somewhere. Anyway, I'm gonna take off here and head downstream, going that way. I'm really blown away at how low the water is. Normally, I have to hike up and around to get downstream because this is pretty much just a raging river through here. My daughter and my wife usually swim in this swimming hole here, which is usually, the water's up above these rocks, or you can climb on these rocks, but the water's at least probably 8 feet higher. So it's July 10th. And the water is extremely low. In fact, I've never seen it this low. It's just absolutely beautiful. As I said, the water's really low. I've never ran this part of the river with my little alpaca raft. I love forests like this.
pretty confident that this hasn't been logged in many, many years, if ever. The trees aren't gigantic, but I would still say they're well over 100 years old. So maybe there was a fire that came through at one time. But it's just really nice. It's got a carpet of moss. You can see through it really easily. Ferns, vine maples, just beautiful. Got my fishing sandals on, and they're great for walking on wet rocks, but not so great for hiking. Gotta be really careful. No traction. Anyway, last weekend there was people down in here, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw people again. It was 4th of July weekend, so maybe we'll be by ourselves this time. I guess for some reason I used to think it dropped off more. I don't know. Doesn't look like it drops off that much at all. Probably run it in the alpaca. Used to bring my wife and my daughter here, and we'd spend a week in paradise. And they'd swim, and I'd fish. Anyway, doesn't get any better than this. Well, maybe a little better if I was catching fish. It's not like fishing in Idaho or Montana. Although I have caught some nice fish here. It's usually later in the summer. I think I'll rig up my pole and try a nymph and see if I have any luck with some nymphs. Nice little waterfall up in there. Pretty nice fish. See if I can get it in a little bit more without losing it. Not much of a fighter, but nice fish. Okay. That's right. It's like a, I don't know, 12, 13 incher. Push the barb down a little bit more. I like these little airlock indicators. They work really well. Easy to take on and off. Move up and down your line. Okay, dry fly action. Let's see what happens. I know I had a rise right out there when I first threw it out there, so we'll see. Obviously, you can see how big this tree is. This tree and that tree out there, definitely old growth. I mean, this tree's probably 3 to 500 years old. Amazing. I love these big trees.
It used to be I could come up here for a week and not see anybody, and both weekends I end up coming across tourists passing through. These two young ladies had hiked from the bridge up above and were hiking to the bridge down below. They were quite surprised to see an airplane sitting there and wanted to take a look. It's just a sign of the times. The more the population grows and the more the urban boundaries are stretched, people want to get out to nature and explore. Even though I'd rather be alone, I do feel encouraged by the fact that two young women are out exploring on their own this beautiful country we have. It does make these wild places seem less wild when you see people, but the people that do make it to these off the beaten path places hold the same reverence for these places as I do and aren't out destroying and leaving trash and garbage behind. So, leave no trace. I guess I've cut down some Scotch broom, so I did leave some trace here, but Scotch broom's invasive anyway, and so a little less Scotch broom in this world isn't going to hurt anything. Almost all the places I land, you'd be hard-pressed to find tracks or any sign that I've been there, especially if it's been more than a few weeks. You might see some tracks in the sand, but after that, it's pretty hard. I try to give more than one perspective taken off. So I've got the 360 GoPro mounted overhead, and then I've got a GoPro mounted above my head inside the cockpit. Even with the cameras, it's impossible to get the feeling that I get flying out of here. That 300 feet is pretty short, but the GoPro does not make it look that way. That's kind of a failing in what you see in any of my videos is you don't experience how short or how tight or how difficult it is. And there's just no way, I think, to bring that difficult level to the viewer unless they've actually landed places like this. And then they can say, yeah, that was pretty tight. That was pretty tough. Well, this concludes another adventure. I made it home safe and sound. I managed to raft a river that I've never rafted before and clean out a spot that holds a near and dear place in my heart. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. As we get into this summer season, I'm going to be out adventuring, fishing, hunting, camping. I'll have less time to make these videos, but never fear. As winter rolls back around, Greg will be hard at it at his computer, editing the latest, greatest adventures.